In this video, I'm exploring two Western Maryland steam locomotives, as well as a little bit about the Western Maryland Railroad and its modern counterpart, the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. I'll also cover some prototype information about the two locomotives, putting them through a gradient test and running them in a couple of the routes of TRS2019. Also, how I had to actually handle the control of two locomotives at the same time. So let's get into it. I'm going to start with just a brief overview of the Western Maryland Railway. The actual name is a little confusing. In earlier days it was called the Western Maryland Railway. However, the employees and management often referred to it as the Western Maryland, and indeed that was the only name put on the engine and rolling stock. And the organisation which has taken over part of the track as a tourist operation is called the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. Anyway, as you can see on this well-detailed map shown here, at its peak, the Western Maryland ran from Baltimore to Cumberland, then on down to Elkins, where the Western Maryland's biggest yard was located, and further to River Junction and Durban, as well as Webster Spring, with interchanges with Baltimore and Ohio, Chesapeake and Ohio, Pennsylvania Railroad and others, with another division heading off to Connellsville and several other small branches along the way, mainly for access to the coal country. The Western Maryland was often considered by many primarily a coal carrier. However, the headline was Fast Freight Line, and it did indeed represent a significant percentage of the traffic. And Western Maryland also successfully ran several named passenger trains right up until the late 1950s. The line was known as a Class 1 line, but was typically called a regional railroad in later years. Western Maryland had its origins in 1852. And operated as its own entity until 1983, but was taken over in 1968 after Baltimore, Ohio and Chesapeake, Ohio jointly filed in 1964 for permission to acquire control of Western Maryland, and this was eventually taken over by the Joint Railroads in 1968. However, it operated independently under its own name until 1975. At that time, many of its lines were abandoned in favour of the parallel Baltimore, Ohio lines. In 1983, it was fully merged into the B&O Railroad, which later also merged with the C&O Railroad into what was called the Chessie system, and all that is now part of the CSX transportation. The Western Maryland is an interesting line, moving from the big city atmosphere of Baltimore right out to the Appalachians of West Virginia. Here are a couple of photos of Cumberland Station, where the new scenic version of Western Maryland has its office. It is a distinctive and impressive building. The only preserved Western Maryland steam locomotive appears to be number 202, which is a 462 Pacific, as shown here, along with a couple of Western Maryland caboose, or is that cabooses. Here is a shot of the Western Maryland Decapod number 1107. Note on the tender it just says Western Maryland, with the logo above saying Fast Freight Line. An earlier shot of 1108, which doesn't even have the logo. The Decapod survived operating right up until the end of steam in 1954. Sadly, I think they were unable to save any of the locomotives because they were assigned to a trust. This means it was financed by a third party, in the form of a lease, and the locomotives had to be handed back to that third party, who subsequently had them scrapped very quickly. Western Maryland also had the 4664 articulated locomotives, which were essentially the same design as the early Union Pacific version, shown here. And just to show you the visual splendour of the Western Maryland line, here is a shot of the Cumberland Narrows, which serves as the western gateway from Cumberland to the Appalachians Plateau and Ohio River Valley. On the left-hand side is what was originally the Baltimore and Ohio Main, with Western Maryland on the right-hand side on the opposite side of the river, actually called Wills Creek. Western Maryland tracks on the right now form part of the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad that I've mentioned earlier, and the Baltimore-Ohio line on the left is now part of CSX, but the area certainly presents a grand sight indeed. Let's move on to the Decapod locomotive. The Western Maryland Decapod 210 was the heaviest Decapod ever built, and like the Pennsylvania Railroad similar model, used them in heavy drag service. They did experiment with one unit as a switcher in the Elkins yard. Consistent derailments cancelled that experiment very quickly. The original wheelbase was just too long. The engines as built were restricted to a maximum of 40 miles per hour due to what was considered poor balancing of the 62-inch drivers and the heaviness of the side rods. Western Maryland did do engineering changes later in life, and unofficially they were then able to do 50 miles per hour. And they were regularly used as helpers then on the smaller branch lines as primary transport hauling coal. And despite some design problems, where for instance if the wheels slipped due to the poor balance of the driving wheels, it would cause track damage. So wheel slipping was prohibited. They are also notoriously bad riding locomotives. And they had a relatively small firebox because there was no trailing truck to give them the extra width they needed. But despite these problems, they managed to last to the very end of steam and operated the very last steam-powered passenger train. The Western Maryland 210 Decapod from K L Trainz comes in 3 versions. Version 1 is the version that came with the logo on the tender and is numbered 1106. These are dynamic numbers, but you can select the number if you wish. It has a red roof and a red footplate on the top of the tender, and it has conventional switching steps on the front and back of the engine and tender. Version 2, seen here, is numbered 1104. And is the earliest version where there is no logo on the tender, no red roof and no red footplate on the tender, but in all other respects is virtually the same. Version 3 is also numbered 1104, and one exception is virtually the same as version 2. However, the front buffer has done away with the conventional switching steps, and instead it has a different style altogether, known as a snow skirt. It is designed to remove light snow from the track as the locomotive moves along. I'm not sure, but I think this is attached or removed depending on where the locomotive was operating and the time of year. If anybody knows better, please let me know in the comments below this video. So let's not get too carried away with specifications and such like though. Let's have a look at how it stacks up on our gradient test track, which ultimately throws a 1.6% grade at these engines. I'm testing these with 10 coal hoppers and the caboose. I suspect one engine may not handle this at such a heavy grade, so let's give it a try. And we can always add a second engine if it can't do the job with one. So here we go. became obvious this train wasn't going to make it. In fact, only half of the train got onto the grade. It is quite possible, of course, that my driving skills contributed to that, so we'll run another test with 2 engines. Most often, I put the 2 engines on the front. However, this time, I'm going to try one of the locomotives as a pusher behind the caboose. Let's see how that goes. Coming next video is a New Year channel update, in which I'll outline what videos are in the pipeline, including the following topics: tutorials, route development, product reviews, train simulator news, but only when something worthwhile is announced, and that's just to mention a few of the events being planned right now. So make sure you subscribe to ensure you get a message when each new video is uploaded. Okay, let's get back to the video. It seems to me at this point the pusher locomotive is not really contributing much at all. So in desperation, I'll try using the advanced controller on both engines. This means it will require me jumping back and forward between the front and rear locomotive and adjusting the throttle settings accordingly, just to see what this does. notice, to get the best result, I had to set the rear pushing locomotive to apply less power than the front pulling locomotive. This seemed to stop the two locomotives fighting each other and the resulting clash on the coal hoppers and strain on the couplers. If you listen carefully, you may note the beat of each locomotive is slightly different. What do you think? Taking control of both locomotives has made a significant difference. Once I've uploaded this video, I will send a query to K L Trainz, as I've always found Steve Larrow very helpful and full of knowledge on these things, just to see what he thinks about this. Hopefully he can view the video and tell me if I really have done something dreadfully wrong. Once the bulk of the train's off the grade, the power of the pusher locomotive becomes somewhat redundant, so I'll cut it back to almost coasting settings, and that's interesting. And I suspect, or maybe hope's a better word, that maybe this is exactly how it happens in the prototype situation. I would like to encourage you to consider giving me feedback on your concerns or opinions on what I've said, or where they might help me to do a better job. Accordingly, there are a couple of ways you can do this. The easiest, but least useful, is the like button, only because it doesn't give many clues as to why you did the setting you did. So a better style of feedback, which admittedly takes a bit more effort, is to make a comment in the area immediately below this video. I encourage this because I really want to encourage your constructive feedback, which is very important to me, and I always read each and every comment and will respond if I can appropriately. So please take the time if you can. I will appreciate immensely. But okay, that's enough waffle. Let's get back to what's most important. The Western Maryland Railroad often pooled motive power with the Reading Railroad, is that Reading Railroad, and when the Reading started using its new Class T1s, Running times were improved on the Allentown, Pennsylvania to Hagerstown, Maryland freight trains. This caught the attention of the Western Maryland, and in 1947 it took delivery of 12 484s from the Baldwin Locomotive Works. Being considered a southern railroad, Western Maryland rejected the name Northerns and called its 484s Potomacs. These 12 Class J1 Potomacs, road numbers 1401 to 1412, were designed for freight service with 69-inch drivers, 26.5 by 32-inch cylinders, a boiler pressure of 255 psi, a weight of just over 500,000 pounds, and a tractive effort of 70,600 pounds. They were the last 484s built new for a railroad in the US, and all were taken out of service by the end of May 1954 and placed in storage in Hagerstown and Cumberland. They were not sold for scrap until the Equipment Trust ran out in 1957. Sadly, the Potomac 484 engines were destined to operate in obscurity. They were never fully recognised for their capabilities like those of competitor railroads. And with 69-inch drivers rather than 80-inch most 484s had, they excelled at long heavy freight drags, albeit at a lower speed. But they only operated for a short 7 years. Western Maryland crews liked them because of the closed cab, it was warmer in winter, better riding characteristics than virtually all the other Western Maryland engines, and they were relatively quiet. Crews were often heard to say a baby could fire them. Sadly, good photographs are rare, and they're often heavily copyrighted, so I haven't many to show you. Accordingly, let's get into the grade test, run with the same load as the Decapod, but somewhat more noisy than the Decapod. And as you may guess, they handled this load with ease, flying up the grade substantially faster. So, here we go. Just look at this engine behind the Decapod. It is a handsome brute, built to handle serious tonnage. Let's see how it goes. I like the whistle and the echo effect. It has a very deep exhaust, but not so noisy. The cab details include most of what's needed. I suspect it's very much the same as the cab in the Decapod. However, I doubt it was in reality. But in all honesty, given the effort to get overall quality of the engine graphics right, I don't mind a compromise to keep the price down a little. And this pack is great value, with two engines, one with white wheel tyres throughout being the main difference, and cab figures, multiple outside views integrated, 3-part whistle, which I really like, animated bell, reverse headlight on the tender, animated coal load, a secondary blowdown, and even a tender outside view. Amazing value at US $10. And remember, all my K L products are paid for by me. As you can see, the grade does not affect this engine at all. I might speed up the video a little right here as it just keeps plugging away at roughly the same speed. Now the train has reached the top of the grade and speed increases quickly. Well, there you have the Potomac, a brute with nice lines, plenty of punch and some style. I hope you enjoyed this test. G'day, here I am on the Western Maryland Railway in the impressive Potomac 484 steam locomotive. I'd like to thank you for staying for the full video and ask you to give me some encouragement by subscribing if you'd like to see more. If you subscribe, don't forget to ring the bell. That makes sure you are the first to hear when a new video is released. Also, use the comments below this video if you have anything specific to tell me about. It's one of the best ways you can influence what I do next, or to tell me about something that helps me do something better next time. Okay, I guess that wraps up this video, so until next time, hooroo!